President, thank you very much. The answer this afternoon in question time from Senator Gallagher really did bell the cat and revealed the fact that Labor has no real interest in ever meeting its supply targets on housing. And after almost 2 years of Labor, you would have to say that the housing policy has been one of its biggest failures. And that is because Labor has shown no capacity to meet their own housing targets, and they've showed no creativity in trying to help Australians get into a first home. Now, in fact, this whole issue of home ownership has been made so much more acute because of the recent data where we see 660,000 people come into the country in the last year and only 170,000 houses being built. So for every 4 people who come into the country, there's only 1 house built. Major problem. And then to make matters worse, all of Labor's policies to try and alleviate the housing disaster have either been stalled in this parliament or have already failed. The HAF is a $10 billion boondoggle which will only be a minor band-aid on a major gaping wound. The Help to Buy scheme, which has already failed at most state levels, is jammed in this parliament for good reason. And I agree with the Greens when they point out that the Help to Buy scheme is an absolute joke. No one wants to use it at the state level. And guess what? Most Australians don't want to see a politician or the government sitting around their dinner table when they go into their own house that they own. So the central problem here is that Labor has given up on home ownership. That is actually the problem. They've given up on it. And so their only solution is, OK, we're going to have super funds own the houses. We're going to give them tax breaks. We're going to have foreign fund managers own the houses. We'll also give them tax breaks. Then over here we're going to allow the government to own up to 40% of the equity in your house. So it is a trifecta of giving up on people owning their own house, with the only solutions Labor willing to countenance are big government, big super funds and foreign fund managers. And that is why the issue of housing is getting worse, not better, in Australia, because people feel that they will never get into a first home. Now, the most troubling part of this debate, though, is that Labor will not even countenance thinking about allowing people to use their own money to buy a first home, for example. So they don't like the idea of people using their own super, even if that might be their only pool of capital. And absent the Bank of Mum and Dad, which is now a major lender in Australia, for many Australians, particularly older millennials, using super may be their only shot of ever getting into that market. And the key determinant of your success in retirement is not your super balance, it is your home ownership status. Now, Labor don't seem to care about this fact. They would rather people be forced to save in super for 40 years, where you have to pay huge fees to the fund managers over here, and where you also have to pay high interest to a bank if you ever get into the market. And what we're now seeing is a large amount of Australians are now getting to preservation age, and they're using their super to retire their mortgage. So what was the point of super? What was the point? Why force people to pay huge amounts of interest to a bank when they could have owned their own house faster? It is absolutely crazy. So Labor has given up on home ownership, which is very regrettable for the Australian people, because we're stuck with this government for the short term. The Greens policy, of course, which is probably less wacky, is that there should be a government property developer, and that should be allowed to build and then sell the houses. So that is a Soviet-style approach, very interesting, but at least consistent. And then, of course, you have us in the Liberals and the Nationals, who are the only party that want the people to own their houses. We don't want the super funds. We don't want the foreign fund managers. We don't want the government to own the houses. We want the people to own their houses. And we want people to be able to use their own money, including their own super, to own their own house. And that is why we're committed to, and I take the interjection, why we're committed to seeing more supply, particularly in the cities, because we know that you only solve this problem with a huge amount of construction, and therefore the demonisation of the property sector by the Greens and Labor is just bizarre. I mean, these are the people, this is a sector that could actually solve the problem. They could build the houses we need in the cities so that our children have places to live. So it's pretty bizarre, and we thank Senator Gallagher for being honest today that Labor has no plan to solve the housing crisis.